She never expected her life to shift between two worlds so drastically. Most days, she lived quietly, moving like any other hard-working woman trying to get through a long shift. The diner wasn't fancy, but it was steady, and she had learned to blend into the routine, refilling coffee, greeting travelers, and offering the kind of warmth people rarely returned. Her co-workers knew her as calm, soft-spoken, and always willing to cover someone's shift. Nobody imagined that behind her gentle smile stood a life far bigger than the walls of that small roadside diner. She lived simply by choice. She preferred peace over recognition, solitude over noise, and anonymity over the expectations that came with her real identity. The morning of the incident began like every other. She tied her apron, checked the breakfast specials, and stepped onto the floor just as the first customers trickled in. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. The only sounds are the hum of dishes and quiet conversations. Before we dive deeper, take a moment. If this story already has you feeling the tension, hit that like button and drop a comment sharing what you would do if you were in her shoes. Sharing this story with someone who needs to see it could make a real impact. But small things felt slightly off. She noticed a tense exchange outside between two officers and a driver. She heard loud footsteps that didn't match the pace of the usual morning crowd. And for the first time in months, she felt a strange heaviness in her chest, an instinct she had never learned to ignore. Still, she kept moving, hoping the uneasy feeling was nothing more than another stressful day. She wiped down the counter, took orders, and tried to focus on the simple rhythm that kept her grounded. But as the door swung open harder than usual and unfamiliar voices filled the room, she sensed her peaceful morning ending. Something was coming. Something she couldn't yet name. And whatever it was heading straight toward her. The moment the officers stepped inside, the diner's atmosphere changed. Conversations fell quiet. Forks paused mid-air. Even the steady hum of the coffee machine seemed to shrink back. They didn't walk in like men searching for help or clarification. They walked in like hunters who had already chosen their target. Their eyes scanned the room for barely a second before landing on her, as though the sight of a black woman in an apron was enough to confirm whatever story they had already built in their minds. She stood near the counter, holding a tray she hadn't even placed down yet. She had no idea why they were approaching her, but the tension in their faces told her this wasn't a simple question or misunderstanding. One officer stepped closer, shoulders squared, hand resting too casually near his holster. The other scanned her up and down with a look that carried years of bias, suspicion, and something darker, certainty. Not curiosity. Certainty. They demanded her name before she could even greet them. Their voices cut through the diner with an authority that didn't feel like protection. It felt like power being performed. She answered calmly at first, hoping her composure would ease whatever concern they claimed to have. But her calmness only irritated them. It was as if they expected fear, stuttering, or guilt. When they didn't get it, they pushed harder. They accused her of using stolen money. They said someone reported a black woman bragging about being a billionaire in a place she clearly didn't belong. They twisted her words, insisting she had been flaunting wealth, trying to scam customers, or hiding something. Their voices grew louder, drawing every eye in the room. She stood frozen, not out of guilt, but out of disbelief. How quickly they had crafted this narrative, how easily they had decided who she was. If you're still with us, pause for a moment and hit that share button. Let someone else witness just how quickly assumptions can destroy a life. And stay tuned, because the moment that changes everything is coming up next. She tried to explain, but every sentence she began was interrupted. They waved off her words, calling them excuses. One officer grabbed her arm as if she were already guilty. The other reached for her apron pocket, searching her without permission, without pause, without a shred of humanity. The customers watched, some uncomfortable, some curious, but none brave enough to intervene. The humiliation sank deeper with every second. She could feel her dignity slipping from her grasp, not because she had done anything wrong, but because they had already decided she wasn't allowed to defend herself. When she insisted they check her ID properly, they laughed. Not a kind laugh, a dismissive, mocking one. A laugh that said they didn't believe someone like her could have anything worth proving. Then the tension escalated even further. They claimed they had received confirmation that she matched the description of a fraud suspect. She knew instantly this wasn't about truth. This was about bias, assumptions, and a system that didn't care who it crushed along the way. The tray in her hands trembled. Her heart pounded. But somewhere inside, a quiet strength formed, a reminder of who she truly was beyond their narrow, hateful assumptions. Just as one officer reached for his cuffs, ready to drag her out in front of everyone, something unexpected happened. Something that shifted the entire room's energy and froze the officer's mid-motion. The moment her real name echoed through the diner, everything stopped. The officer's hands froze on the cuffs. Customers turned toward the doorway. And she felt her breath catch, not out of fear this time, but out of knowing exactly what was about to collide with the assumptions made about her. A tall man in full military uniform stepped inside, his presence cutting through the tension like a blade. The room fell silent as he walked straight toward her, his boots echoing against the floor. He didn't look at the officers. Not yet. His eyes focused on her first, scanning her face, seeing the fear she had tried so hard to hide. Then, with a slow, controlled breath, he turned to them. But the officers didn't recognize him, not at first. They barked at him to step back, hands drifting toward their weapons again. They were so locked into the story they had invented about her that they couldn't imagine anyone important being connected to her. It was their arrogance that fueled the next moment, the moment that sealed their fate. The man's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority that could silence an entire base. He identified himself by rank, a name that carried recognition far beyond the walls of that diner. And then he said the words that shattered the room, "She is my sister." The officers' faces drained of color. The disbelief, the panic, the sudden realization of what they had done, it played out in real time. They stepped back as if the ground beneath them had shifted. For the first time, they saw her not as a suspect, not as a stereotype, but as a human being with a life far larger than the small box they had tried to shove her into. But the damage had already been done. The humiliation, the violation, the years of assumptions condensed into one awful morning. And now the entire diner watched as the truth they had ignored came crashing down. The general stepped closer to the officers, his voice dropping into a tone that promised consequences. And what he said next would change everything, for her, for them, and for everyone watching. In the minutes that followed, the energy inside the diner shifted from tense to painfully quiet. The officers who had barked orders and thrown accusations now stood speechless, their authority stripped away by the truth they never bothered to seek. The general didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm anger carried a weight far heavier than anything they had tried to impose on her. He demanded accountability, right there, in front of everyone. He called their precinct, reported the incident, and made sure their actions wouldn't be brushed aside as misunderstanding or procedure. But even as consequences loomed over them, she didn't take satisfaction in their panic. She felt tired, drained. Because for her, this wasn't just about two officers. It was about a lifetime of being seen as less, until someone powerful stepped into the room. The general escorted her outside, away from the stares that had watched her humiliation but stayed silent through it. Only when they reached the parking lot did he ask if she was okay. She nodded, but the truth weighed heavier than words. The incident had exposed something she had tried so hard to avoid. No matter how quietly she lived, no matter how humble her life seemed, she could never escape the assumptions placed on her skin. In the days that followed, the story spread. Not because she wanted attention, but because people needed to see what happens when judgment replaces humanity. Some were outraged. Some were defensive. But many saw a harsh truth they could no longer ignore. Because this wasn't just her story. It was a reminder of how quickly dignity can be taken and how slowly justice tries to catch up. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss stories that reveal the truth the world often ignores. And remember, sharing this with someone today could help spark the conversation that changes how we see each other. And it leaves us with a question, one we can't keep avoiding. How many more lives will be shattered before we finally learn to see people for who they are, instead of what we assume them to be?